Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. Welcome to join us from different time zones. I'm Shandley, a faculty member of UIUC, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and a PI of the Yellow Peril Redux projects. Thank you for joining us today. This is the sixth event of our online speaker series titled Yellow Peril Redux, from coolies to incarceration camps, trade wars, and coronavirus. This project is funded by our UIUC's call to action to address racism and social injustice program. The rhetoric of next slide, please. The rhetoric of Yellow Peril dates back to so-called Asian invasions of the 19th century. And the COVID-19 pandemic inspired a resurgence of this rhetoric and its consequences. So I will skip some points on this slide to save time, but I will emphasize that our project situates Yellow Peril in the US as a history of systemic racism, complicated by US-East Asian relations and by mutual misunderstandings between different cultures. We study its historical moment and development, cultural expressions, and social consequences, historically and in the present. This project draws on our research and teaching expertise and extends our relationships with community partners inside and outside of Illinois. Our online speaker series is one of the three parts of this project. The other two parts is a library database that includes primary and secondary sources on Yellow Peril. And the third part is a museum exhibition at our Champaign Historical Museum. And the next slide, please. Briefly about the bigger program. It is called Call to Action to Address Racism and Social Injustice Research. It was started in July 2020 by our Chancellor Jones. He announced a $2 million annual commitment by UIUC to provide support for academic research and the expansion of community-based knowledge that advances the understanding of systemic racism and generationally embedded racial disparity. Our team, next slide, please. Our team includes scholars and experts, as well as community leaders from different fields and disciplines. We also include undergrads and grads from different majors. Before I introduce to you our chair today, let me have a quick review of our past events. Next, please. Ooh, okay. Here you can see we have 5 events since the past April. We invited historians, legal experts, human rights activists, film director, artists, and museum directors. If you're interested in any of these topics, you can go to our website here. Their recordings are available. Yang, you can copy paste this link and send via chat to all our audience. Next, please. Now let me introduce to you our our chair today, Professor Miranda Brown. Professor Miranda Brown is a professor of Chinese Studies and in the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Her recent research focuses on Chinese food culture and history. She is a very well-known scholar in our academic world. She also has a very impressive profile of public engagement and community outreach. So now, Miranda, the podium is yours. Oh, by the way, Professor Brown is a Fulbright scholar. Now she's in Taiwan, almost midnight there. So thank you, Miranda, for joining us at such a late hour.
Thank you, Shandley. So I just want to welcome everybody and thank them for joining in. So I guess my role today, and excuse me if I'm not completely coherent, it is a little bit on the later side where I am in the tropics. But my sort of goal is to moderate the conversation and lead, and also to sort of throw a lot of maybe awkward questions at the panelists. So today's sort of program is going to focus on the theme of so the sort of consequences of Sino-American tensions on campus climate. And we're going to be looking at this from a number of angles. We'll be focusing on scholarly sort of collaborations, the climate for Asian and Chinese origins scientists. We will also be talking about, sort of the role that the China Initiative has had on the ability of graduate teachers to recruit students from China, as well as undergraduate education, and sort of the US's ability to recruit excellent students from the Chinese-speaking world. So without further ado, I'm going to just sort of invite all of the panelists to introduce themselves. And I guess we have exactly 5 minutes allotted. And I believe today we have only 4 of us. So maybe I can just go around the table and sort of, call on people. So I guess our first speaker, panelist is Professor Yong Chen. Yong, would you mind sort of unmuting yourself and saying a few words about who you are?
Good morning, Miranda. Good morning, audience from Southern California. My name is Yong Chen, or Chen Yong in Chinese. I came to the US in the 1980s to study at Cornell as a graduate student. My subject of study was American history, and still is. Okay, and I have been working as a historian, a professor of history at the University of California in Irvine. Thank you all.
Thank you. Can we have the next slide, please? And then we have Charlotte Koo. Charlotte, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to join this interesting conversation. So I am a professor of law at the Texas A&M University School of Law and director of global programs here. Kind of a personal note, perhaps relevant to this conversation, is that I was born in the United States because my parents were graduate students, in fact, in the United States from Shanghai in the 1940s. But I spent my childhood in Hong Kong, under British Hong Kong in the 1950s and 60s. And so a lot of my interactions with China and the like have been influenced by that. Thank you.
And then I think we have Robert Markley. Is Robert here?
Yes.
Okay.
Good morning, evening, afternoon. I'm Bob Markley. I'm the department head of the English department at the University of Illinois and the Trowbridge professor of the humanities. I'm going to be talking, when I get a chance, about trying to keep a program running in China during the COVID pandemic, which our department was part of with aerospace engineering, which presented and continues to present some challenges. And I'm also a scholar of Anglo-Chinese relations in the 17th through early 19th centuries. And I have a long and involved story, which I won't share with you, about my book being translated into Chinese and taking 7 years between 2016 and 2023.
Okay, so I guess I'm supposed to ask the questions, and I believe that we are on some kind of schedule. So I understand that I'm supposed to ask a question, and we're supposed to have about 8-ish minutes, to address them. So the first question is, and I apologize, these are my questions so they may be too direct. Can you talk about your role of international collaborations with China and/or your global education in your work? or as it sort of pertains to your specialty field? And then sort of as an additional question, why do you think those collaborations with China or engagement have been important to your work, to your university, or to U.S. scholarship more generally? And what has the U.S. gained as a question, not, of course, leading question at all? So I will throw open the I'm sorry, I'm barely speaking English at this point at time of night. Open the floor to the panelists. They're digesting the question.
Well, if I can jump in. In addition to the background that I introduced earlier, I was also for about 8 years on the Urbana-Champaign campus overseeing Masters of Law programs at the College of Law there, where I worked with hundreds of students from China who were coming through for that particular education. So in that respect, China became a very important element in my work life there unexpectedly. But still gave me some insights into how things were going with China, but certainly an important element for the law program at Illinois. In terms of my own scholarly work, I pursued international law, which is what I teach. And part of that stems from basically an innocent question that I posed to my grandfather in Hong Kong some years ago when I asked why it is that Britain had given Hong Kong to China. And he was quite outraged by my question and looked, what kind of education is she in? I was actually sent to English language schools and pursued an English curriculum. In any event, my question was not answered until I pursued doctoral work on the subject of equality in treaties and in the frame of international law, which is the field that I pursue. And so I have written particularly about China in the 1920s and its effort to equalize those treaty relationships and that network that really impinged greatly on China's ability to function as a country. So my relationship with China in this respect have had some both direct and indirect elements dealing with my professional engagements.
I just put into the chat a link to the joint program between Zhejiang University and Illinois, which is run by the Aerospace Engineering Department. But the English department actually sends 4 lecturers a year to China, to Henan, to teach approximately 220 students in the program English. The Chinese students, the program is in its 8th year. It was designed that the Chinese students would come to the US in either their last semester of their 3rd year, first semester of their 4th year to do projects in here and in the University of Illinois and to get a joint degree. So this has been quite a complicated situation to manage over the last particularly 4 years since COVID. We've had problems with our own lecturers adjusting to life in China. Indeed, I have a meeting later this afternoon because one person who went over for the whole year now wants to come back because he's homesick and has family problems. But it's really a fascinating kind of a snapshot for me of watching this program change and develop during the COVID years of different attitudes towards public health, different attitudes towards education. And I think that we have tried to keep a dialogue open with our partners in China, which has not always been easy. And I think the failure is not one of communication or not one of goodwill, but one of simply different values and assumptions about how a program should run. So, for example, the administration in China is very reluctant for us to do Zoom or to go online for various courses, which was obviously what we were doing here at our own institution. So we had people in quarantine in hotels for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, during the height of the pandemic and trying to maneuver that. I think the program as a whole is quite successful, but it's a myriad set of challenges that we're working on constantly, both from the students' point of view and from the lecturer's point of view, none of whom right now are of East Asian heritage. So you can get a sense of the program if you follow that link, but it seems to me it's one of the things we should be doing more of as we emerge from the worst stages of the pandemic, because I think that the issues that we're gathered to talk about in terms of racism and in the U.S. in particular are also a set of complex problems in understanding cultures across the Pacific Ocean.
Okay.
All right, maybe let me jump in here, if I may, Miranda.
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. Again, my name is Yong Chen. My areas of research include Chinese American history, U.S. immigration history, and U.S.-China social, economic, and cultural interactions. Okay, so our trans-Pacific perspective and international collaborations have been very vital for my work. So when you look at the history of immigration to the U.S. and the ethnic communities in America, it is very clear that many immigrant groups and ethnic communities, such as Italians, the Irish, and Greeks, they have maintained very close ties, multi-layered ties to the country of their ancestral origin, and Chinese Americans are no exception. So as I'm a historian, so I'm going to put the conversation today in larger historical context. And I will first do that by making two very brief comments. The first point is a discovery that I made during my research. It is that in order to understand the experiences of Chinese immigrants and Chinese Americans, we must understand the immigrant communities in the Peril River Delta in Guangdong province, the history of China, and the development of Southern American interactions since the 19th century. Second, you mentioned global education in your question. My second point is that this is extremely important for understanding not only the past, but also the future of U.S.-China relations and Chinese America. It has been, meaning global education, it has been one of the two most important and longest lasting aspects in Sino-American relations. The global education started with the trend or the movement of Chinese students coming to the US for education, a trend that has continued, as we all know, to this day. And it has been a very, very integral and vital part of modern Chinese history and the history of Chinese Americans. So Chinese students were among the first to arrive in the US, beginning in the early 20th century. For me and for many Chinese students who came to the US to study after the opening of China in the late 1980s and early in the late 1970s and early 1980s, for those of us who have stayed in the US, engaging in international collaborations and global education has been not only an important part of our work, but also a vital aspect of our personal experiences. So very, very briefly, personally, for me, at UCI, I've done my part, my small part, in an effort to maintain to stay engaged with China, with Chinese scholars and students. Okay, so at the campus level, UC Irvine, I've helped to arrange the visits of university leadership to China. Okay, and also I have helped to extend the collaboration between the China Scholarship Council and the three schools of engineering, humanities, and social sciences. Okay, and so this is something very interesting because I think the intention of the China Scholarship Council was to send students in STEM, in engineering and sciences, to the U.S. Right, and so I went to talk to them and said, look, we also need to include students in humanities and social sciences, and they agreed. Okay, and those are two of the things that I've worked on at the campus level. And finally, another thing is I've also worked very, very closely with with students from China. We have thousands of students from China. Okay, and something that I'll touch upon later, I hope. Yeah. So in my role as the founding faculty director of the International Student Excellence Program. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess we should move on to the second and third and fourth question, my apologies. So now I guess that we're going to go to sort of the present day, which is the impact of Sino-American tensions on, current collaborations, engagements in higher ed. And this can, take a variety of forms, including admission and hiring efforts to recruit outstanding students and scientists from China, or, Chinese American or Chinese speaking communities. And then I think we'll just do that question, and then maybe we'll move to the next one afterwards. So I'll open the floor.
So maybe I'll jump in first again on this one. So at Texas A&M University, in preparation for this, I reached out to some of my colleagues at other units in the university system to see how things have been going with regard to admission and recruitment of students from China. And COVID was definitely some kind of a breaking point where numbers would have declined, and it seems unlikely that they will recoup and move towards what they had been prior to the COVID period. So I asked engineering and business, which at least at my time in Illinois were one of two of the biggest units for students coming in, particularly for graduate work. And in both cases, they've expressed change, and they don't think it's going to go back to the old times. Some of what Robert Markley was describing is what the business school people told me about their experience with regard to exchanges in China. At the law school at A&M, we curiously have no students in our master's program from China. We have in our JD program students from China. This very different from my experience at Illinois, where the principal cohort came from China. Emphasis in recruiting these days is much more focused on India and other parts of South Asia, and much less so in the North Asian area. Whether this has to do with Sino-US tension or COVID, mix of all these things, this is hard to know, but it's quite marked in terms of the drop-off and change. I had a question also for my other panel colleagues, and when maybe they can address it in the course of their own remarks, which is in terms of their own experiences and the views of students who have returned to China about the United States, whether this has changed. Because I actually observed this during my time at Illinois, where people would be more positive about the United States after their experience going back to China. But then as towards the end of my time there, things were a little bit more reserved, skeptical. I won't say negative. People probably don't go into negativity, particularly when they're sitting, in your office in Urbana-Champaign. But there was some difference I noted in terms of attitudes about their experience or the U.S. itself as a country. I don't know if my colleagues who are more closely associated with some of these things have observed some similar trends.
I think we have, and the humanities is often, and the qualitative social sciences are often set to the side a little bit when we talk about engineering and the hard sciences. Indeed, the program that I linked to earlier are science-based programs. We've had a drop-off in the number of Chinese students who are applying to our graduate programs, which I think is unfortunate because if we're going to talk about understanding, and as we all have in various ways, I think the humanities and qualitative social sciences have to play a part in that. Clearly, we used to have regularly faculty from Chinese universities come to the U.S., be sponsored, study with us in one way, shape, or form, or collaborate with us. That's where the translator of my book was here for a year right before COVID, brought his family over, loved it, wanted to come back. Since that time, he's a little more measured in his assessment of what it was like to live in the U.S. I think that another thing that we're experiencing is the almost complete collapse of students from Illinois and other universities wanting to study in China and to study Chinese culture, Chinese literature, Chinese history. In a weird way, it reminds me of those generations of scholars, Peter Perdue, Ben Elman, who, when they were in graduate school, could not go to mainland China and would be based in Taiwan or Japan and hope to talk to expatriates. So I think we don't want to go back to those bad old days. We want access to historical records, to data. We want collaborators, active collaborators in China. And I'm very concerned about that. We have a network of humanists and historians that is international. It's more or less based in Australia right now. And we had multiple conferences between 2012 and 2017. We had 4 or 5 conferences in China. Those have completely collapsed, and we're not sure what to do next with these friendships, with these collaborations, with the need for records records in China that have only recently historically become available to scholars in the West. So it's a significant problem.
So if I might suggest that we bundle this up also with the second part of the second question on the slide, because I see that we have.
Let me start by trying to address the very good question in the chat. Whether Chinese students, whether they plan to whether they Chinese students planning to study in the U.S. ahead of time, and would it make them live happier, more successful life, in their stay in the U.S. And there, I think most students that I have encountered, this is not based on a statistical evidence, okay, but I do interact with a large number of Chinese students on the UCI campus and elsewhere, right? So I really think they enjoy it, and China, the U.S. Remains the most popular destination for students intending to study abroad. And this question also has another element, right? What happens, when students go back to China? Many of them have a very fond, very positive memory of their experiences studying in the U.S. Okay, so that's again, when students come to study in the U.S., that experience opens up a whole horizon for in their life, and so they in their future, professionally and in their personal life, they will continue to navigate the Trans-Pacific space. That's what happened to people of my generation, and I think it will continue to be the case for the younger generation who will study in the U.S. or have studied in the U.S. And about to the question about how to about impact of Sino-American tensions, how that has affected the collaboration and global education. The total number of Chinese students coming to the U.S., I think, is in decline, right? After World War II, higher education started to become globalized. Right? At the end of 1940s, there were about 25,000 international students in the U.S. And then before COVID, in 2019, there were over 1 million international students in American colleges and universities, right? And then COVID hit, right? And then the U.S.-China relationship went downhill, right? And that affected the total number of international students and also the number of Chinese students. Okay, dropped significantly. UC Irvine, before COVID, we had more than 4,000 students from China at the undergraduate level, right? But after the the China initiative and the policies like that, after the trade war and especially the outbreak of COVID, right, the numbers started to drop significantly. And what is interesting to note is that as of this year, the total number of international students bounced back to the 1 million student mark. Okay, but UC Irvine locally, the number of Chinese students, not international students, has continued to decline. So we are under 3,000. Yeah, it's about 2,700.
Okay, wonderful. I guess we can move to the final slide and set of questions. All right, so I guess I'll start reading them. What do you think are the potential long-term implications of such, I guess, tension or scrutiny for Asian Americans in the U.S., for higher ed, for racial and social justice? And then just sort of spitballing, and I'm going to invite you to sort of, make comments on the topic that you would like to make or things that you think are important to sort of share, in this forum. And I'll open it up to the floor again.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. Very, very thoughtful comment. What Professor Xie has pointed out leads us to a very, very important fact in the lives of Asian Americans, but especially in the lives of Chinese Americans, right? That is the racialization of all Chinese Americans, right? So this has happened in U.S. Anti-Chinese immigration citizenship policies in the past, and this continues to go on today. In other words, there is no effort to distinguish between different groups of Chinese Americans, right? Those who were born in the U.S., those whose ancestors came from Malaysia, from Cuba, right? It doesn't matter, as long as you have some Chinese blood, you're all Chinese, right? You all have connections with China, with the Chinese government. Okay, so this is what I call racialization of Chinese Americans, and this has really helped to marginalize Chinese Americans, not only in society, but also in the realm of higher education. Okay, and so this is something that we have to keep in mind, and this is something that we have to fight against collectively. All scholars of different backgrounds, and Chinese Americans are keenly aware of this, right? A lot of them are concerned about the U.S.-China tension, right, which could become worse in the future or in the near future, right? So people are asking, people have vivid memories of what happened to Japanese Americans when over 100,000 Japanese American citizens in the 3 states of California, Washington, and Oregon were put in concentration camps. Okay, and they worried that this could happen to Chinese Americans. Okay, so it's a very, very important fact to keep in mind.
Do the sorry, do the other panelists want to jump in?
As somebody who's not of Chinese ancestry, I can say I'm appalled by the ignorance about China, Chinese culture, Chinese customs, Chinese history by my colleagues often who try to put the complex history of China into a rather simplified post-colonial box. And I think that one assumption I encounter all the time is that the Chinese students who are at the University of Illinois, and at last count, there were over 7,000. We're the only university that has football games broadcast in Mandarin, which says something. But my colleagues all assume that we're getting the cream of the crop of Chinese students at Illinois, and we have excellent students, of course. They know nothing about the national university system in China. They don't know that most of the undergraduates we have here have already had a course, not only in English language, but in English literature before they come over here. And I think it's that kind of ignorance that all Chinese students want to be in math and engineering is kind of detrimental to the communities, to a range of communities on campus. And I would point out too that there's this unwritten sense that foreign students should be grateful for coming to a university in the US. Whereas, as you probably know, students from not only China, but from Korea, from a number of countries, are going to be vital to critical issues that we face, like the shortage of healthcare professionals in the US, which is now well over 150,000. And I think this lack of understanding of historical culture, of any kind of sense of how we got here, where we're from, what we're all working together to overcome, is a real problem, including among professors as well as among other students. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
I'd just like to toss in something that maybe turns the conversation a little bit more inward, because in my experience with the groups of students I worked with, and maybe because the Master of Law programs is a short one, students are there for only a year, or in the program for only a year. At Illinois, we were not able to recruit from the very top schools that other higher ranked law programs would be sucking up, those students, but nonetheless very able students. But what I observed was how the students kept to themselves, and even within the groups would keep to themselves in smaller groups and not very much engage either with other of the Chinese students on campus, and certainly not very much with the core population at the law school. And this was something that I worked with colleagues at Illinois about. And in fact, I came to know Xiao somewhat, in this kind of context. So I think it's some of that as well. the approachability, the engagement, the ability to be part of a community, and whether it's racial or cultural, there are barriers that often people lapse into. Well, language is inadequate, or something or other. But one just never quite gets to the core of getting to know each other and work with each other. And so I just put that out there. I have no insight or answer to this, but I see this as something that was occurring that I don't think helps what we're trying to discuss here.
Well, can I sort of, as the sort of chair of the panel, may I also just sort of ask everyone to sort of think about along the lines of general sort of thoughts people have about things they want to share, or if there was one message you'd want everyone to come away with on the subject, what would that be?
Would two thoughts be okay? You said one thought.
Absolutely, yes. At this point, I can't even count, but
yeah, two very brief thoughts. If you look at the experience of Chinese Americans, Chinese immigrants, and Sino-American relations, right? During the era when Chinese immigration was banned, was excluded, right? The exclusion was focused on labor immigration, right? But if you look at today, and then in the exclusion era, intellectuals, namely scholars and students, were exempt. Okay, but if you look at what's going on today, Chinese American scholars, students, they bear the brunt of the surging anti-Chinese sentiments. I think this is particularly concerning. That brings me to the second brief remark that I want to make. Because education, global educational exchanges between the U.S. and China, have been a barometer in Sino-American relations, right? And so the fact that students and scholars of Chinese descent, including Chinese Americans, they bear the brunt of the tension of the anti-Chinese sentiments. This is worrisome for a lot of people. And so my second point is, if we want to improve Sino-American relations, want to maintain the engagements, okay, we have to continue educational collaboration. We have to continue our effort in our educational thing that's good for Chinese Americans, that's good for the U.S., for also good for China. Thank you.
thank you. Bob, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that these comments are spot on in terms of the challenges we face. And I think, taking a broader historical perspective, these attitudes go back to the beginning of the 18th century. And, I could go into a long, boring historical explanation. They actually antedate U.S. Relations with China and go back to British and French relations with China and European relations with China. During an era when China was a dominant economic power in the world. And so there is a kind of question here in terms of the racism that's identified specifically with Chinese immigrants and Chinese American citizens. And that is that part of it seems to me, is a return of a cultural fear of a genuine bipolar world, a competitor. I mean, there was this sense after the so-called end of the Cold War that Russia and communism had collapsed. But China has always been, a major economic power and continues to be. And what I tend to hear in sort of learned discourse are half voice, unexpressed, or often expressed comments about the Chinese economy, and a Chinese economy that's somehow cheating by going straight from cell phones to having to build up the kind of network infrastructure that we're all used to the old landline phones and so on. And I've observed when I've been in China with colleagues that there really is a sense of a disconnect between what Americans who are not of Chinese heritage expect when they set foot in Beijing or Hong Kong or anywhere on the mainland, and what they actually see, which is an extremely sophisticated authoritarian society. And I think a lot of Americans are expressing the kind of fears that were expressed about the Japanese 40 years ago, in terms of their taking over. Everything's made in China, and so on. And I think there's a long history of these economic as well as cultural anxieties that needs to be explored. So.
Okay, thank you. So we are actually very much on I guess schedule. So I guess what I'm supposed to do now is conclude and sort of like encourage everybody to type questions for the panelists. We have 3 already. But I guess one thing that I was wondering is, and maybe the panelists want to sort of say something about this, which is how these tensions might sort of undercut sort of American sort of technological advantages, or American science, or American sort of educational sort of richness. I mean, I think a lot of our discussion has actually been sort of focused on the sort of effects that the tensions the China Initiative have had on sort of Asian Americans and Chinese origin students and immigrants. But sometimes I pondered if we were to try to make a case for keeping collaborations open, whether it would make sense to also talk about all the benefits to keeping these channels open and flowing, and what might be lost. So I don't know if anyone wants to jump in there.
Yeah,
Yeah, let me add a footnote to that. Since the 1950s, there have been 8 Nobel Prize winners in physics and chemistry who are of Chinese descent, and most of them came to the U.S. as international students themselves. And 3 were born in the U.S., but the parents of all these 3 were also international students. Now, one of these 3, Samuel Dean, was born actually Miranda in Michigan. Okay, but his background took him back to China just shortly after he was born. So he grew up in mainland China and then in Taiwan. This is just a piece of evidence, a compelling piece of evidence about the talent that in the contributions of international students. They have brought to scientific research, to higher education in the U.S. Right? That, again, and then the second point that I want to make is that there are also maybe short-term financial benefits for U.S. institutions, especially public institutions, right? So this is perhaps why the 2 colleges of business and engineering bought an insurance policy at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, against a significant drop in the number of Chinese students. So if you look at the tuition that a Chinese student pays, either Urbana-Champaign or UC Irvine, right? Between residents, the difference of tuition in for residents and for non-resident, including international students, right? The difference is huge. It's over $30,000 a year in some cases, right? And so they bring millions of dollars to individual public institutions in the U.S. I mean, I can go on. There are many benefits, yeah. But we should also keep in mind that this kind of global educational engagement also benefits China, right? It has always been the case. International students who studied in the U.S. From China have played a very, very vital role in the process of modernization of China. And they will continue to play that role in China. And they will continue to play a very important role in improving the relationship between China and the US.
Right. And this is a point I was going to make, the one that Professor Chen has just noted. I think the value of people who are in government, who are in business, who are at law firms, from the work that I do in China, that really cement and support, U.S.-China business and diplomatic and other kinds of relationships, I think cannot be underestimated. And to not have this pipeline and involvement. And this goes back historically in the work that I was doing in the 1920s, at a time when China barely had a government. Their diplomats were out there representing China, but very much using the connections they had because of networks they had established while they were graduate students. One of the questions in the Q&A had to do with opportunities for students, Chinese American students who have graduated from programs, moving through channels, either academic channels or other professional channels, and the barriers or obstacles they might face that may have increased as a result of perceptions of tension with China. I think that's a very real issue, and I certainly see that in the law field, where it's just tough to do something with your degree after you complete it. I don't know if colleagues have a comment on that. I just want to flag that because I think it's an important question to answer, since one of the attractions of individuals coming to the United States to study was also that the United States, unlike the UK and Australia and other places that also had good educational opportunities, was that we had more professional work opportunities available to international students, but that may be changing. So.
All right. Well, I think we're actually at time. It's time for us to open the floor to questions. So I am going to just sort of review the questions that we currently have. And then if you want, this is, I think, addressed to the participants. If you want to add questions or thoughts, feel free to put them in the text box. So I'll start with the first question and address it to the panelists. So what perspectives or knowledge, if known to Chinese students planning to study in the U.S. ahead of time, would make them live a happier and more successful life in their stay in the U.S.? So does anyone want to give advice here? Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in there? Okay, so then I'll move to the next question, which is the there's a question. One of the participants wrote that they wanted to share their personal experiences reflecting on the profound impact that Sino-US tensions have had on individuals. As a graduate of Zhejiang University and a current lecturer at Westlake, I was a finalist for the 2019 Fulbright program during my PhD studies. Regrettably, the COVID-19 epidemic broke out and the Fulbright program was terminated under Trump, leaving a lasting impact on my academic journey. So anybody any of the panelists care to comment?
Well, I think that the future trajectory of collaborations between the U.S. and China does have not only a geopolitical dimension, but a domestic political, what's the word I'm looking for? Domestic political context in the U.S., where I think, if a Republican candidate is elected, we can expect kind of more of the same, because I think this long-standing nativist tradition just lends itself to that kind of rhetoric. And I think that, again, it seems to me that across the disciplines, as all of my colleagues have said, these international collaborations are absolutely essential. And even in the humanities, which is often quite conservative, we're now integrating East Asian literature and culture into our 200 level English courses, or introduction to the major courses. We're teaching, for example, Chinese science fiction and Japanese science fiction alongside of American science fiction, which is a huge draw, by the way, for Chinese students in our classes. So I do think that what happens in 2024 is going to have impacts on what the Fulbright program and other international collaborations look like going forward, which is something I think we all need to keep in the back of our mind. I think, individually, one of the things that a 7 or 8 year gap in collaborations will do is force you to restart collaborations, and actually pass down collaborations, in my case, to a sort of younger generation of scholars, since many of my colleagues in China who I'm working with have retired, or retired during COVID, because they were now in their 60s, and they're not active anymore. So those are kind of random thoughts, but I thought we should mention those.
Yeah,
Okay, maybe.
Oh,
Go ahead, please. Is that Yong? Please.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I'm always a little bit reluctant to talk about the future. Right? This is not only because I'm a historian. Right? So as a historian, I always look into the past. Right? It's also because the future is so unpredictable. Right? But every one of us, every human being, future is something that we have to think about all the time. Right? And the point that I want to make is, well, maybe two. Yeah. There are a lot of uncertainties. Yeah, people like me, frankly, do have concerns, anxieties about the future in this regard, right? At the same time, future is also something that depends on what we do at the present, right? So the second point is, as individuals, we should, every one of us should do what we can to improve Sino-American relations, to improve the environment for students and scholars in the U.S., and frankly, to help to ensure peace.
Good, thank you. So I have 2 more questions that I thought we would try to race through. I'm sorry if I haven't paced things well, but first question is from Derek Meyer. I think I read and heard from colleagues that many higher education institutions in the U.S. are moving away from partnerships or collaborations with Chinese higher ed institutions. So I guess the question is whether this is also the case at your current institution, and I guess now we're being asked to share.
I also wonder if, our program is about China, but I also wonder if there is kind of a reflection or a rethinking about international engagement generally at institutions of higher education that may just not be so interested any longer in actively pursuing as many collaborations as perhaps we were accustomed to doing at one point. Again, from my just very brief conversations with colleagues at A&M, interest in Asia seems to be something that's just fallen off a bit. But I didn't have time enough to really probe whether that had to do with interest generally. On the other hand, we have large numbers of students who continue to go on study abroad programs and things like this. So I think there are a number of unknowns that we perhaps are dealing with here, of which China is a piece. So I think it might be useful also to understand what this is in terms of just overall attitudes about international engagement and where China fits into that.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for literally one more comment or a question, and very briefly. So we have a last question, which is about the comment comes from someone whose research directly engages with Chinese immigrant communities at Urbana-Champaign to build a community archive. And they write that even though our community has a long history of being discriminated, and it is continuing today, I find people tend not to talk about it. What's worse, we sometimes become not polite or even racist as other racial minorities. So my question is, how can academic work raise a critical awareness of Chinese immigrant, and in what way? So complex question, and maybe a minute at most or two to address this. And no takers. Now I feel like I'm like running a seminar. College
Miranda, why don't you say something? You haven't said much. We'd like to hear from you. Why don't you say something about it?
Why don't I say something about it? It's 1
Mhm.
a.m. in Taipei. And I'm at this point, barely able to string together a sentence. What can academic work do? I mean, I think there is a lot of good academic work out there. I think we have seen a number of very important, essential reading pieces in our Q&A tonight. And I want to just also mention that I was very inspired by the PNAS piece about sort of climate for Chinese scientists. What I think academics need to do, if I am going to be sort of my usually overly direct person, is probably translate their sort of scholarly work into a public facing format and blast the message to raise awareness with the widest possible reading public. That's what I would say. And then I would say also, to harass university administrators as much as possible, because I think, and I was thinking about Professor Ku's comment about the fact that, there may not be a lot of interest right now in the international education. I think that's something we need to really think about, right? I mean, we had a vice provost for international education at Michigan. That position has been renamed a vice provost of engaged learning. And so I do think that there's also, and this is not, I don't want to defend Republicans, but I don't want to let the liberals off the hook either. And one thing that I've noticed is that there has been a very sort of strong turn inward among liberals in the United States, right? And so now I'm actually, making the case at points, for the fact that we can never, like cancel a fourth year Chinese, even if we don't meet sufficient enrollments. Yes, I know that the US has problems, but, we do need to continue sort of educating, people in a sort of strategic, tense area of the world. So I think that what we're dealing with right now is a turn inward. That's a problem. And also I think that we have a lot of really good data that exists already that needs to be sort of broadcast to the reading public, the voting the citizens of this country. And so I guess it means, I would say, more outreach from all of us. And that was my soapbox. So Xiaodan, I know you're also probably about as awake as I am right now. Do you want to bring this to a close?
Yeah, I'm in Hangzhou, where Zhejiang University is located, UIUC's partner university. Yeah, it's 1 o'clock. I would like to wrap up with thousands of thanks to all our panelists. Personally, I've learned a lot of valuable and thought-provoking information, knowledge points, discussions and inquiries. And some topics we covered today by our panelists definitely deserve more conversations and research. And of course, as the last question points out, we also need to figure out how we in academia, what can we do, act, call to action, how we act, right? How we play our social roles as intellectuals, not just publish what we discover in our research. So, and again, I would like to explain to our audience quickly about the absence of our 5th panelist, Dean Shandley, also from Texas A&M. Bush School of Government and Public Policy. He has a family emergency, so couldn't participate. Otherwise, we could hear from him about something concerning Confucius Institute in the US, but I'm sure we will find another opportunity. And also, I would like to thank, which I should have thanked them earlier, I would like to thank our coordinator, Miss Yang Liu, for her wonderful coordination, and also thank our outreach coordinator, co-founder of a Asian American NGO in California, Yuan She, the Society of Heart's Delight, Michelle Zhang. Thank you too for all your hard work. And also thanks to our audience, especially those in East Asia, for staying with us at such a late hour. Really, really appreciate your support to our project and our efforts. Okay, I think yeah, that's all for tonight, this morning. So have a good day, have a good evening, have a good weekend.